before we get started with today's webinar, I just wanted to take a quick minute to acknowledge the impact that the coronavirus has had on our members. And by our members, I actually am talking about the individuals who make up our IITA family and not just the businesses. We talk a lot about the impact on the industry and the impact on our members' businesses, but let's focus on the people for just a second. We need to remember that many of our members have been furloughed or laid off, and there's not too many companies that are hiring right now. So I wanted to mention a new website. It's htta.us, which stands for Hospitality, Tourism, Travel, and Activities in the United States. And it was founded by Jonathan Alkubi, and it's a registry of people in our industry who have been furloughed or laid off. It provides a conduit for them to stay in touch with the associations and the DMOs that they've been affiliated with, and it is a way for them to stay connected to the industry. It's also a way for us to know where our important family members have ended up. So if you or anyone you know has been laid off, please go to that website. It's htta.us and sign up so we can keep track. It would be great to make sure that everybody stays in the family during this really difficult time. Now to today's webinar. It's no secret that air travel is the essential factor in seeing international travelers, particularly from long-haul markets, return to the United States. And in every webinar we've held, every conversation we have, air travel is always cited as the biggest and most critical of the unknown elements that will trigger our actions. So today we'll gain some insight into what factors are driving airlift from aviation experts Alfredo Gonzalez and Gavin Eccles. Most of you know Alfredo. He's the founding partner of AG Hospitality Group, who before starting his own company was Vice President of International Sales for Visit Florida. Before that, the Senior Vice President of Global Partnerships for Brand USA. And with more than 2 decades in the industry, Alfredo has extensive experience with aviation development, which started when he served primarily as the VP of International Tourism at the Greater Fort Lauderdale CVB. Gavin Eccles is an aviation and tourism consultant and professor with GE Consulting. He has 25 years of experience in marketing and strategic management in the airline, airport, hotel, and tourism sectors across both public and private enterprises. Having assisted a number of airlines like British Airways, EasyJet, Hainan Airlines, Jet2, Eurowings, American, United Airlines, TUI Travel, just to name a few. The list goes on. The focus of his work today is the commercial link between aviation and tourism development. So you can see both of these gentlemen bring to the table a great deal of knowledge and experience and will be able to shed some light on the future of air travel. Although there may not be specific answers yet as we navigate this crisis, Alfredo and Gavin will provide information and perspective that will help us be better prepared for the recovery. With that, I'll turn it over to Alfredo to set the scene for us. Alfredo? Alfredo, you're on mute.
Anyway, I was saying thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Rebecca and Sarah. It seems here that am I muted? Okay, I just got unmuted. Anyway, thanks IITA, thanks Rebecca, Sarah, Lisa for putting this together. Thank you to my partners. I want to thank Gavin Eccles, AG Hospitality in Portugal, and Fernando Harb with Spotlight Hospitality, who has helped me put this presentation together as well. Today, we're going to talk about the status of the industry when the air industry relates to what's happening after and during the pandemic. We want to discuss the current situation in Europe and Asia and how it's going to impact us, hopefully, when the sky is open. Now, big note, this is all contingent on some interest, both US and departing countries. And the other is scientific and medical. We can't really do anything until we hear from that side. But there are 4 things we do know. We know that there are no dates right now. We don't have dates. We have ideas of dates, but we don't have dates. The few dates that we have, they're going to be tied to whether there is going to be a treatment or eventually a vaccine. And again, those dates now vary between, it could be end of the year, it could be 18 months, we don't know. In the short term in aviation, we know that this is going to be all adding up to domestic opportunities. We're not going to cover a lot of that domestic today, but that is one of the outcomes of what's going on right now in the airline world. And my fourth thing that we do know is that no one can do this alone. Whether you're a CVB, a DMO, a hotel, an attraction, a restaurant, or a retailer, you're not going to be able to do this alone. If you do great, you're going to get a gold star, but you can't. This is the time for collaboration, partnership, joint ventures, whatever you want to call it. Work with your partners or work with your DMOs or your CVBs. This is a time to leverage your budget, leverage their lack of resources, your smaller staff. So that's what we're going to discuss a little bit later on. With that said, let me turn it over to Gavin. Gavin lives in Portugal. He's a great Brit, but he lives in Lisbon. And I wanted him and I wanted us to hear what they're saying out there. What are they feeling, thinking? Because a lot of what we do and say here in the US is contingent of what we hear here. And almost like we're stuck with our own information. What are they thinking? What are they saying that could possibly give us an idea that when the things do turn better and the skies do open, what can we expect, especially for markets like Europe and Asia? With that said, Gavin, my friend, take it away.
Alfredo, thank you. Thank you very much. And also, good afternoon. It's great to be here. I have many fond memories of the USA. Fortunately, I've been multiple times, and it's a shame that I can't be over there with you. And obviously, Europe and the US, we're kind of deep at the moment in COVID-19, and obviously the aviation industry, it's taking a toll on all of us. And of course, what Lisa said at the start, it's not easy times. What I hope I can try and do in the next 15 or so minutes is just bring a little bit of what can happen and where are we presently in this situation. I think Alfredo asked me to kind of give you a little bit of just how important aviation is, and when you link to tourism. If we look at what the UNWTO is saying, around 57% of all of the tourists that travel are using aviation. And I've been fortunate to work for many years with route development, try and understand why airlines pick certain destinations, and things are radically changing. I think if we go back in times of the 90s, there was always a fight for the supply. How do we get routes? How do we get airlines to start understanding what it is that our destinations have? Because we realized that tourism was the driver of regional and local economies. And this idea of direct flights are very important when you're trying to build up a vision for tourism. What I've learned since is that, the UNWTO are not really, the average is 57%, but you in the US, you're talking around 90% of tourism is connected with aviation. So that by definition makes the challenge even greater, because obviously what you're trying to now do is understand how do we move the mindset that domestic can only be the way forward. In Europe, we don't really have domestic. Let's try and understand our position. We have what we would call intra-European travel. So I'm based here in Portugal. London is 2 hours away, Frankfurt is 2 hours away, or 2.5 hours away. Scandinavia is 3 hours away, Spain is 1 hour away. So what you do by aircraft in your country, we do across multiple countries. And I think what that then says is that the argument now is that those destinations that have a domestic project, yourselves and China, people are suggesting that is where you will see some of the first grassroots of aviation, because it's much easier for airlines to work in a one set of rules. Now, for instance, here, if I take what's happened just this weekend, the United Kingdom decided that they don't know yet, but there is talk that probably at the end of this month, there may be a 15-day quarantine from anybody arriving back to the United Kingdom except if you're French or Irish, which is slightly strange because why France and Ireland? So all of a sudden here in Europe, you're trying to redevelop aviation. At the same time, we have all of this not sure about what might happen. And that's why people have been talking about domestic will be easier because you can control your environment. But we all know, and I've been in tourism like yourselves long enough to know that we didn't build all of our hotels and all of our attractions based upon domestic tourists. Yes, they can be useful, but we need to think that there has to be the vision to drive back that international tourist. Let me try and explain, I suppose, where are we? If we look at tourism, these are tourism numbers. We all know really what's been happening. We got down to this kind of 57% decrease in tourism by March. And we're talking about U curves or bathtub curves. What I'm trying to highlight here and what the UNWTO has been trying to understand is at what point might we be able to believe that we've reached the bottom and there are some opportunities to move the market back up again. If we look at the most optimistic scenarios, and maybe this is probably where Europe is slightly ahead of you in the US because of where we've got to presently. We are hoping that today there's been more negotiations with the EU about the next set of policies on opening up flight space across countries. Generally now, most of Europe is open, minus Spain and Italy. So for instance, here in Portugal, I can fly to London, I can fly to Dublin, Ireland, we can fly to Germany, but we can't yet fly to Spain or Italy, and Italy, Spain can't connect. So we're kind of, we're ready to the extent that the market has to start saying, okay, if the capacity is there, should we now really start to develop? So we've got three types of scenario. If we can get the borders open within the next 2 weeks, there is some potential that July could be a month where we start to see airlines really starting to open up their capacity. There are, I think, one of the challenges at the moment is that there's a lot of bookings. Obviously, in the tourism world, most people that were thinking of taking trips, particularly here in Europe during summer, June, July, August, September, may have made bookings 1 year ago. Even bookings up to January, February, people were still booking travel. So whilst the governments have put people into lockdown, obviously airlines were able to cancel flights and allow people to be moved. But as we now start to move out of lockdowns, theoretically, the airlines will start to say, well, capacity can be made available. There are bookings in the system, and it's up to the passenger to then make that decision if they travel. So the whole project in the next couple of weeks is not about trying to understand how we support supply. It's how do we ensure that the demand feels confident or comfortable, reassured that destinations are doing what they can to support that arrival. So I'll explain this a little bit more, but at this, we try and get to the extent that the bottom has been reached. And certainly when I show you some of the aviation numbers, it's quite interesting what we might see in the next few months. Looking at how experts, we're all experts, so let's see, how do experts see the next weeks, next months? Around 60% of tourism experts believe international tourism could be back in some dimension this year. A lot of people are saying, oh, this summer's gone, it's not easy. That may not be as or maybe that's a bit negative. Maybe there are some opportunities to try to maybe look at, maybe June is going to be difficult for sure, but July, August, September, and pushing a little bit into the shoulder months. But I think it's important that we don't underestimate what people are saying. There seems to be a lot of discussion that it's not all lost. And if you look at, we've had in the last week, there's an airline over here in Europe, Wizz Air, based out of Hungary, launched flights out of Hungary and Eastern Europe to Abu Dhabi. They opened a new base in Abu Dhabi. They're talking about taking some of the slots potentially out of Gatwick. The CEO came to the TV and said, look, it's, I think a lot of people are getting a little bit fed up, and maybe people will travel. So I think, with everybody's going down the kind of the glass is half empty, but maybe not. Maybe we just need to, and this is one of the things with Alfredo, I think, we're all been in this, we're all experts in tourism. We all understand where we are, but I think sometimes we've got to be optimistic ourselves to try and bring that over to the market. And we've all been here before. I remember landing at Heathrow. I'd been up in Scotland for meetings and coming back to Heathrow kind of mid-afternoon on September the 11th and seeing at this stage all of the British Airways 747s parked up. And in those days, it was really just American Airlines doing the transatlantic. And you thought, oh, this is not looking good. And it was about 6 months that it took to try to get the recovery. And then obviously the financial crisis is around 10 months. So we've been here before. And I think, we how did we get out of these two crises? I think we realized that low fares or discounting was a way to drive the demand that was skeptical of traveling, but when price was good, people forgot. I think this time price is not the driver of the next months. I think from what we're seeing, certainly, certainly here in Europe, we've not had airlines looking at doing price campaigns. To be honest, most airlines haven't yet really started to do any promotion. They're all trying to just understand where to go, what to do. But those bookings are in the system, so they have to do something in the next weeks, because we're talking about load factors, particularly here in Europe, of around 70-80% during the summer months. So either people are going to be no shows, or there is going to be a feeling that. Please, jump in. I say go for it.
You had mentioned something that in the next couple of weeks, that people that had actually booked a ticket, they needed to use the ticket. Is there a time that they need to use a ticket before a time they were getting it a credit, but if they go after a certain amount, they lose the money? So they're encouraged to travel?
No, Alfredo, well, if you've booked a ticket with an airline and you've paid, if the governments of the country, be it the disembarkation or the embarkation country, has a restriction on travel, by the convention, the airline will have to cancel. If the airline cancels, obviously the passenger would be rerouted if there was other flights. Obviously, if all space is cancelled, then you can't reroute people. And at that point, you would be offered an alternative. If, let's say now, we're talking about middle of June, if there are no embargoes between United Kingdom, Portugal and Greece and Scandinavia, from the point of view of the airline, they will fly. They will fly. If they believe they have the load factor available and they believe that the countries are open, from the point of view of the airline wants to fly. At that point, the passenger has to make a decision. Theoretically, they're a no-show if they don't turn up. So what we're trying to now do here in Europe is really work with airlines and tour operators as a destination. So as the European countries, what we're trying to do now is provide communication right back to the tour operators and to the airlines in the discussions to say, okay, this country is open. These are the rules about what you can do. Hotels are provided. We've got countries coming up with seal stamps that say that they've been certified, that they've been cleaned, etc. So interestingly, for many years I've negotiated with airlines. The first time when you speak to an airline, it's how much money have you got? Now it's how safe is the destination? So because I don't think airlines are expecting to sell much new business in July and August and September. But what they want to do is take the business that's already there, because they need to get their aircraft moving, because we're parking aircraft. Obviously, in the US, you have the largest area for aircraft to be parked for several months. Here in Europe, the biggest airport at the moment with parked aircraft due to COVID-19 is the new airport of Istanbul, because the airport was built for 200 million passenger movements, and they're at about 65 million back in February. So the ramp space and the area of Istanbul airport is fantastic for parking aircraft. But Istanbul is not a place to park an aircraft for 3 months. Corrosion on the wings will be severe. The lessors will start to complain that the airlines are not being managed. So we need to get airlines or aircraft out of these normal airports. You can't leave aircraft for months in a normal airport. Hence why the Nevada desert is, because it's dry. We're talking about humidity now in Europe or in Istanbul. So, I think what was interesting is that of course, airlines can't put all their capacity back at once. So what we're starting to see is that they're going to look at their forward bookings. They're going to say, okay, we've got certain routes, networks where we've got significant load factors. We've not cancelled. Those countries are open. Obviously, we'll put the flights into the system. What might start happening is that maybe there's some consolidation. Maybe if you've got more than one flight a day, you'll try to consolidate. And you've probably been hearing the IATA has tried to say that the mid-seat should not happen. Of course, it's a little bit difficult because we talk about social distancing, but then at the end of the day, if I consolidate a flight, I might take 100% load factor. So how this might pan out is going to be very interesting. But I think just to highlight, at this stage, airlines have not cancelled bookings from mid-June onwards. So because the market hasn't yet said we're not in open space. If the markets don't allow you to travel, then the airlines will cancel, and then obviously the refund system, be it vouchers, credit, has to be put into place. But in the meantime, if you're booking, airline travel, I mean, theoretically, you go onto websites, airlines are selling tickets, not even knowing if they can take those flights, because will the lockdowns be in one state? So I think it's the next couple of weeks here in Europe are absolutely crucial, because we've opened up many of the countries. The airlines took the decision to basically park everything through May. And some have now said, let's move it probably to the second week of June. So we're really looking at mid-June as when that loads will be happening. Of course, we're moving into the peak summer holidays in Europe. So I see that as being our next phase. That mirrors with this graph. It looks a little bit complicated, but basically take the green line. The green line is capacity. This is not load factor, it's capacity. What you can see here is quite interesting, that we obviously had a major fall in the period of the start of February with the Chinese, and then obviously Europe and the US, we've gone down to the bottom. But if you think about where we are now, and where this is research showing the capacity that will go back into the market. We are talking about the third week of June with a minus 20% capacity, when we were down at minus 85 6 weeks previously. So this is the crucial realization that airlines are not waiting. They've got to get their planes ready. They've got to get the systems in place. What they're now having to try and understand is, what will the demand do? And I think that's where I hope some of the Q&A will be. How do we stimulate demand? As I said, airlines, it's not about money. Like they may say to the airport, let's talk about some of the airport taxes, etc., to help stimulate. But they want to try to take those passengers that have already booked and build up to then think about, how do we start opening up sales for late fall, and of course building into the winter and summer 2021. The low-cost airlines here in Europe have now got all their summer 21 selling. They need cash, so they're selling tickets for next year, even not knowing what will happen this year. So it seems strange that you can book a holiday for summer 21. I don't even know if the airline will be still with me. But that's the situation that the airlines are saying, well, maybe nobody's going to book anything now, but they're going to go on holiday if they've already booked and paid. But if you haven't done anything, maybe it's a good time to get a deal for next summer. But, we need to manage this crisis where we are now. So just to show you that the capacity is coming back for sure. Airlines, it's not, we're talking about minus 20%, 25%. That's a huge difference than if I'd have said to you back in third week of March, do you think we can do this? A lot of people would have said, forget it. So there is a little bit of recovery coming through. And again, that's where the lockdowns are being opened up. Alfredo, your point, the quicker the lockdowns, obviously they've got to be done in a very, very safe and secure way. But the mindset is, if the borders open, the lift can start again. Hopefully we're not taking too long. China, this is, the bellwether at the moment is what's happening in China. Not domestic, this is international. So if we look at the moment in terms of what's been happening in the Chinese situation, we're talking about, again, they hit their bottom February, March. 81% down Chinese international travel. The big three, China Southern, China Eastern, China, everything stopped. They're back. They want to start flying. The question now is, where can they fly to? They've started a domestic project. You probably heard during the May holiday, the Labor May Day holiday, they gave 5 days holiday. Actually, the hotel business increased dramatically. They're now focusing on international. The Chinese Aviation Authority is providing airlines, be it Chinese or international, incentives per seat kilometer to develop international routes. The capacity, this is just how interesting it is. They are presuming by September, they will only be 6% down on their international capacity. They want to place their aircraft back in an international marketplace. And obviously, if you think about December, January, China just became the largest international outbound tourism market. So, the marketplace was saying, hey, the Chinese are going to start traveling. Then they went down. And all of a sudden, again, looking at our figures and looking at their figures, there seems to be a lot of capacity. Again, can that be demand? That's the thing we have to think about. I'll rush on a little bit more. This was some research about when people from Europe would go from forward keys into your markets. The strange thing is that a lot of travel to the North Americas is quite late bookings. Unfortunately, if we take the orange line, we can see that in 2019, a lot of people were making their decisions to make bookings to North America at the time this year that we went into lockdown. So yes, we've lost, for sure, we've lost some of this, but is there any opportunity to get back during the late summer any of the potential business? Again, it depends on how countries start working to try to ensure this idea of communication and reassurance. Finally, on the aviation side, I think one of the questions is, there's a lot of aircraft around, and for sure there's a lot of airlines that may not survive. So we've seen in the first 4 months of the year 120 aircraft retired. Around half of that are the wide body aircraft that could easily be working from Europe to North America. And I think one of the things that we'll get into the discussion is about how to work in partnership with some of the European tour operators that might not have access to flights, meaning that if, who knows what's happening now with Norwegian. Let's say Norwegian is not coming back in the next 6 months, but we have demand to want to come out of the German market, demand out of Scandinavia, demand out of Europe, but there's not lift available, there's planes available. In the past, tour operators took risk in taking Acme aircraft. Do tour operators have liquidity in Europe to rent aircraft? Probably not. But with tourism boards and partnerships and businesses together, maybe there can be some sort of project to try and look at, if we can't rely on the flag carriers or the secondary airlines that were flying back in January on some of the North Atlantic routes, maybe we've got to think differently. Maybe we've got to start understanding, how do we utilize aircraft that may now be parked, and try to understand how that might look. You as we said, 90% of your travel is by air. You're at 80 million arrival. Basically you're one of the top 3 destinations in the world for inbound tourism. You've been growing 3% per year for the last 10 years. And obviously a lot, 61% is coming within your community, but you've still got 37% coming out of Europe and Asia. And that's what I just mentioned about the project of maybe starting to think differently about how you connect lift, tour operators and your destinations. In the past, we've relied on the flag carriers, the subsidiary airlines. Maybe it's time to think about how we develop connectivity to support destination development and working the model a little bit differently. That at that point, I'm kind of wrapping up. I think what we're trying to say and what we'll discuss is that there is opportunities. The industry is at the bottom. Everybody wants to get out of this. Everybody's ready to try and do things. What's crucial now is that the airlines need help, for sure. And it's not just incentives, it's not just money. They need trust. They need to really work with the destinations, work with the airports to say, how do we reduce the risk together? As I've said, I've not normally sat in airlines where the first discussion is, how can we work to communicate, not how much money do you have to support my marketing? The mindset is changing. It's support the demand, not the supply. However, in cases where we need to build new supply, let's try and understand how that might look. Incentives, risk reduction, campaigns, not any different than we were doing in the last few years, but the mindset has changed. The partnerships have just got stronger and much more aligned together. I'll leave you with a little bit of a joke. The level playing field is changing. We've got to change it back. Like what I'm having here in Europe, we cannot, Portugal, Spain, countries cannot rely on domestic tourism. We have got infrastructures too big for that. We need international dimensions. We need to try and see how that can come back together. At that stage, I'll stop. I'll pass back to Alfredo to take on from here. And let's open up the discussion and see how we can try to assist. Alfredo, the floor is yours, my friend.
You're on mute, Alfredo. You're on mute.
Okay, because I'm actually using my.
Oh, turn your computer sound off.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys, I had him call in on a phone line because he was breaking up before on the computer line. So there you go.
So can everybody hear me now?
Yes, but we have the echo. Is your computer sound on?
I'm going to try to separate myself from the computer and maybe continue this.
I think we've lost him.
I see. There's a Lisa. There's a question from Mr. Stephen Richer. Do you want me to, whilst we
please.
Do you want me to see if I can try to explain? I think it's a very interesting question about immigration and quarantine. Yes, I think obviously what happened with the United Kingdom was quite unexpected. That this comment was made, and it's causing a little bit of concern because people don't know what that actually means. And I know Greece has also now started to maybe think about doing some health testing. You have to test 72 hours before. I think that the challenge in all of this is that's not making it easier for people to think about travel, and unfortunately, it actually makes it easy for people to think about domestic travel. So I think one of the challenges is coordination between the markets, and certainly the EU with the United Kingdom, that there doesn't seem to be a link in the way that maybe there should have been. And I think this is causing some of the bigger airlines, people like British Airways, Ryanair, EasyJet, Group 2E, etc. So I think, what is going on, guys? Because we opened up the country, or the countries are opening up, and all of a sudden we're now talking about quarantine. It doesn't seem to fit with how we try to go ahead. So, of course, if you make testing within 72 hours, some people will then say, but what then happens when you arrive at the destination? And it's going to be one of these challenges. And Jordi Zarroca, the same. Spain, it's from the Europeans' point of view, they mainland Spain has kind of said that they know that it's not easy for them at the moment. The islands of the Canary Islands and the Balearic Islands, Mallorca, etc., they're open and they really want to develop the vision of opening up tourism. But it's going to be impossible, let's be honest. If you're not going to go on holiday and then come home and spend 2 weeks in quarantine, it's not going to happen. So I think it's the same as the middle seat situation. There needs to be some sort of coordinated approach between the different governments, the leading bodies, that otherwise airlines will get scared, because they'll say, well, what do? We're just about to put the UK back in order, and now all of a sudden people have to spend 2 weeks in quarantine. Then they won't fly. So I think there needs to be, and there are, probably some of you saw Emirates. There's a question about testing. Emirates did some testing in Dubai on a flight to Tunisia. So yeah, again, there are ways that we need to move around this scenario. Alfredo, are you back with us? I was just taking I saw questions rolling in. So
at this stage of the game, I don't know if I'm on or off.
You're on.
Hoping to be on. I get a heads up from Rebecca. Well, like I was saying before, and thank you for helping me out on this, Gavin. Don't know what's going on. I just installed a brand new internet system, and now you can tell how good it is. But anyway, what I was trying to say before is that this is an opportunity. We've heard your presentation. We know what kind is going on. But you also mentioned opportunities. What are the opportunities that we have here? And the opportunities are all about partnerships. We've lost staff. We've lost revenues. We don't know what kind of collections, whether it be tax collections or membership collections, we're going to have over the next few months or into next year. So the only opportunities you have right now is to take information like the information you gave us, take it to our boards and say, look, we can't do this alone. The airlines need help. And you mentioned before, the airlines in the US are getting a lot of money, billions of dollars in money, but all that money is not going to help them unless you have demand of our markets that want to travel in. So I mentioned before, until we have entry policy changes, which means allowing people to come here. And number two, one thing that we have to do is, and I asked a question earlier in another webinar they were talking about branding. My question was, we can do all the branding we want, but if in the news in your markets in Portugal is negative, that we have too many cases, too many deaths, how do we change that? Because as you said, they're ready to go. Equipment is ready. We know that we've actually retired. American Airlines retired all their 767s, all their 757s. British Airways grounded and retired all their 747s, but the rest of the equipment is ready to go. All the transatlantic, all they're waiting is for green light. So one thing that we want to know is, are we positioning ourselves properly as far as image, that when the airlines are ready, will they come here or somewhere else? And I think that's going to be an exercise that we all do. How do we present our product as safe and ready, because the airlines are ready to fly?
Absolutely. No, we've been helped here as well. It's not just your airlines. Lufthansa's asked for 10 billion. It's still been negotiated. Air France just got 7 billion. BA is not being helped. The British government thinks it's sink or swim for airlines. It's a little bit of a worrying game. You saw the same with Virgin Atlantic. Obviously, the flag carrier airlines will automatically be back into the US for sure. It's important to connect those hubs to hubs, Star Alliance, SkyTeam, One World. That's crucial. Obviously, where you started to see in the last years was this third movement of Norwegian to start opening up kind of secondary airports, secondary development, and that kind of long-haul, low-cost project. You had Level was created from BA, Eurowings from the Lufthansa group. I think the question at the moment is those big airlines are just a little bit just got to put their houses back in order. So, I'm not sure what will be the vision of Eurowings and Level in the next 6 months, because they've got to get the main airline's got to get back first. So for sure, US, the transatlantic is going to be key. And remember, we talked about sorry, go ahead.
I was going to ask, is that Norwegian model of going to secondary airports something that might be applied now under this new environment, because we now have less equipment and we'll still have demand, but one of the things that the low fare carriers have done, and Norwegian is one of them, was choosing secondary airports where operating cost was also down. So you're selling a low fare ticket to a low operating airport, making it financially feasible. Do you think that's opportunities now for secondary airports that could actually be going finally to be able to get into the international markets, but before they were only hub airports?
I think that it's trying to understand, what's the next big model for aviation, because I think, the long-haul low-cost project was gathering speed. If you look at, started in Asia with Singapore Airlines and Scoot and what they were able to do, then AirAsia Express from Tony Fernandez in Malaysia, then it came over into Europe with Level, Eurowings. You've had it in North America, obviously, with WestJet, what they started to do out of Canada. And then obviously Norwegian, and Norwegian kind of went into, I think your own airline companies have not really exploited this. The big three, American, United and Delta, haven't really started to look at what might be a long-haul low cost. I know JetBlue is talking about now Boston into London, and the using of the A321. And for me, the A321 long range was the game changer for secondary airports in North America and Europe. I'm looking at a destination on the opposite. We're talking to an inbound, so I have to be careful, but I'd love to have American tourists come out of the US to Faro, the Algarve. The Algarve has got 45 golf courses, top design. We've got all of the branded hotel chains. How do I get it to get Delta out of Boston to Faro with the A321 long range? It's a perfect machine to do this. It's a machine for 6 to 9 hours of flying. So we were game changing. American had ordered 50 of these things. Delta had ordered them. And so they're going to, are they going to delay those? Probably not. But is it in their interest now to open secondary airports? Probably not. It's like what I said about Air France KLM. What are they going to do with Eurowings, Transavia, Level? It may be that the subsidiary companies can be more profitable than the big companies, but they're not going to let that happen. It's the same years ago with BA and Go. The low cost of British Airways was more profitable than the airline, and they had to kill it because it was cannibalizing its own company. So you start to see this. There is a movement. I'm sure there is, and with planes around. If you look, I was on a webinar. The leasing in the first 4 months is about, if you want to lease an A330 300, it's not that old, 5 years old. The lease is about 50% down on 4 months ago. So the value of aviation today, of course, it's dropping. But does anybody want to invest? But it's a good opportunity. So I think we can't just say, everyone's going to go back to the big hubs. No, we've got to fight for the secondary airports with these new ways of working and try and ensure that we have the right dimensions of that.
That's interesting you say that, because here in the US, for example, one of the subsidiaries of Delta Airlines is SkyWest. SkyWest actually serves markets that wide bodies or larger aircraft don't. SkyWest was the only airline in the country that over the first quarter of this year actually made money, because Delta wasn't flying those markets, SkyWest did. My question would be, if another carrier wanted to do that and use subsidiaries or other airlines that normally don't serve markets, that could potentially also help our international markets for the 5 to 6 hour threshold, maybe out of the UK, maybe Spain when it opens, and Portugal.
Yeah, and I think, as I said, you've also got to look at who owns the consumer, and I think there's still a lot of there's a lot of differences in Europe in terms of how people book. The UK, it's a little bit of a mixed model, online, offline. Germany, let's see what happens now in Germany. Germany has 20,000 travel agents. TUI owns 2,000 shops. You know, all of a sudden, the power of the tour operator was crucial in Europe. Now, will travel agents be able to remain as they were? I hope so. And I think, you know, travel agents were reinventing themselves and really starting to develop that project. But it's the tour operators that own the channel. And so if you can get the tour operators involved in particularly in Germany, FTI, Der Touristik, these are multiple big groups that don't have their own lift. You know, you've now got the German market. You've got Lufthansa. Lufthansa obviously is in 10 billion investment from the German government. You've got Lufthansa. Ryanair has a very small presence in the German market. No use to you because they don't fly transatlantic. Condor was supposed to be bought by the Polish in a deal with LOT Airlines. It collapsed. Germany just bailed out Condor to 500 million. Condor is a fantastic project because it works with tour operators. It's got planes that can fly Germany to transatlantic. And then you've got TUI. Now, TUI, generally, TUI is quite clever the way they work as an airline. They're integrated into the group with Rio Hotels, etc. And sometimes if you've got their properties, you'll get the airline because they need to take their own passengers to the hotels that they own. It's part of the integration of travel. But you take Der Touristik, owned by Rewe Group. Rewe Group is the biggest supermarket group in Germany. It's a multi-billion company. It doesn't have an airline, but it has shops, tourism. It's huge potential. FTI Group out of Munich, the same thing. Owns hotels, doesn't have lift, but it owns the consumer. So if you want to try and think about developing Germans to the US, are you betting on Lufthansa? Are you betting on the American airline companies? Or do you start thinking about maybe looking at some projects with tour operators to try and integrate in seasonal flying, different types of projects that might be that partnering together that you can create the incentive to support the wet lease of these aircraft I've just said that are all parked on the ground. So I think in all crises, there's opportunities. And I think sometimes it's now trying to understand what's kind of going on in the market. We have the same in the UK. You know, there's, you know, with Thomas Cook going out, it left a void of those tour operators that have lift. Nobody's replaced Thomas Cook. So all of a sudden, you're ended up with it's either TUI, Jet2 on the mass market, or it's the niche tour operators. And of course, the niche tour operators are working with whatever lift they can get access to. Okay. But if you want to try and maybe work some volume projects in coordinated ways, I think the changing now is that there's lift available. You couldn't get lift. It was very hard to find aircraft in the last couple of years. Now the aircraft are available. It's the demand that you have to create. But maybe so it's planes won't be the problem. It's the demand that we need to work on.
Got it.
Gavin, we've got a question in the chat box.
Okay.
From Gabriel Martinez. What are the chances of creating travel bubbles between the US and foreign markets, like Aussie and New Zealand announced? Which ones would you work with in the US, and could it be done region by region?
I think, you know, of course, again, just picking up what I've just said, focus on obviously looking at the statistics. I said, you know, your source markets that you rely on are Asia and Europe. So I think the European project I've kind of explained. I think their focus on UK, Germany, Scandinavia, because I think they have the natural dimension to work with the US. Some of the Latin countries, it may be a bit different. But I think, you know, don't underestimate what I said before about the Asian market coming back, whether or not how you could see a relationship with China, because I think China Aviation is ready more than anybody else. And that's where I say I certainly here in Europe, we're very keen. So if you look at places like Barcelona, Paris, Madrid, the retail business is suffering because of or what it will suffer if the Chinese tourist doesn't come back. So I think it seems to be an opportunity, whilst they are also incentivizing aviation. They have a project to really try and develop the international expansion. it might be an opportunity. Again, it's how it fits in the bigger picture. But it makes sense that you're talking also about, do you want to work with certain, it's hard to say that certain countries are better than others, because you never know if a spike might appear, but it seems to be that at the moment it's the core markets will be the ones that I would focus back on, because at some point that you've already got the brand affinity with the destination. They know a little bit about the project. It's probably a more difficult time to create something completely different. I don't know, Alfredo, do you, from your experience, is it?
You're right on, and I know we're running out of time, so I want to see if I can get any more questions. Rebecca, do we have any other questions on the queue?
We do, and on that same note, I'm just going to skip down to Jeffrey's question in regards to the Chinese, since you just mentioned it. It's a pretty long question, but to summarize, will Chinese visitors even want to come to the U.S. if the negative rhetoric of the U.S. continues? Do you see the U.S. ultimately losing that market share of the massive Chinese outbound tourism post-coronavirus?
Honestly, no. Politics is politics. Let's put yourself in the shoe of the tour operator. It's easy to sell the US, right? You've got a great offer, the shopping, the opportunities. I think let's try to keep politics out of the way. I don't see why there would be any resentment from the grassroots Chinese traveler. They want to see your great country and what you offer.
We saw yesterday in the news, Rebecca, if we saw they opened Disneyland Shanghai opened over the weekend, and it was very busy. And I think there's a connection between the Chinese market and like we said, this politics aside, the Chinese love the U.S. product, and we should be able to give them that product when it's good and ready. And so to think, again, we can't throw politics in there. We got to talk about what the people want. And I think the sentiment is there's always going to be a love for the American product. And I think that hopefully we can still give them what they need once the skies are open. I think it's all going to be contingent, maybe slightly political on when these borders open. But I think that you said it, Gavin, they still love our product.
Yeah, we're desperate. Chinese outbound travel to Europe is 4%. So you're at about 15 to 20% in. So you're 4 times bigger than we are, and we've got Paris, we have Rome, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's the lift. At the end of the day, what's driving that tourism of Chinese? It's easy for you in the US. Is there's going to be lift. The 3 Chinese airline companies are not going. You're not hearing any negativity. So it's not like Lufthansa that doesn't know if it's going to be able to keep Eurowings. It's not like British Airways doesn't know we're going to close Gatwick. Air France is being told by the government you can have 7 billion, but by the way, you can't fly domestic anymore. So let's be honest. You've got 3 big, multiple Chinese airline companies that are ready to fly for sure. They're not having the same problems as maybe we're having in Europe in terms of the battles. They don't want those airlines to fail. Those Hainan is the one that's not worked, and you all know what's been happening there. It's kind of being assumed into the Air China group. Hong Kong Express is being assumed potentially through Cathay Pacific. So they're trying to remove the Hainan issue that was, this was a private airline, the only private airline in China that was flying internationally, that it's not the airline. The airline was fantastic, but the Hainan group decided that they were going to be an airline one day, and the next day they were going to make Spanish and buy a Spanish hams company. They had fingers in every single pie in the world. And not everything worked, and the poor airline was the one that suffered. But the big 3 are driving forward, and I think it's politics aside. They love your country, they love what you offer, and they're back before anybody else. The Europeans, of course, you're going to get Air France, KLM, BA, Lufthansa. They're all going back into the gateways for sure. You may not get Norwegian back, because I'm not sure Norwegian will start probably before 2022 on the long-haul project. From what we're hearing, we don't know. I know there's another BAL and bond was issued. But from what they originally said is that they would take the bond, park the aircraft, do a deal with the lessor, and restart everything in 2022. 21 would be a kind of transition year. That then said is that you need a new Norwegian, or you need a new long-haul low-cost that can open up your secondary airports. If not, think about going to the tour operators, work with them, create demand, aircraft are available, and work on back-to-back rotations in and out using third-party aircraft.
Thank you, Gavin. That's great. Rebecca?
I want to be mindful of everyone's time today. It is almost 3 o'clock, so I do want to wrap up. Alfredo, Gavin, do you guys have any closing remarks you'd like to make?
Well, the only closing remark is that we got to, I know it sounds like a cliche, but we got to do this together. We don't have all the information. The book on tourism and aviation tourism is being written every day. The FAA just changed the incentive rules. So smaller airports will be able to have bigger and better incentives, not necessarily all cash incentives. I think that the FAA has also lifted some of the restrictions on the work that a destination can do with their airport, both domestic and international. So we're open. I think by the end of this, I think there was a slide that has my email and Gavin's email and Fernando's email. We're open for questions. Anything, any concerns, questions that you have, feel free to contact us direct or through you guys at IITA. And any questions that remain unanswered, we can answer directly to each individual that sent it.
That's great.
And I think,
Gavin, anything closing?
Yeah, hopefully I've not, maybe hopefully it doesn't come across as kind of blind optimism. I've tried to highlight that capacity is there for sure. The airlines are going to do something. The question is demand, and we just don't know. But I think that's what I said. I think it's the time now that trying to create the right communication, partnering, and we don't know until there's a vaccine. But if there's no vaccine for a year, and you say there's no airline travel for 1 year, that's not going to help anybody. So I think we're in the trade. We've got to be the bellwethers of positivity. So I like to spin that. Maybe the Wizz Air was a little bit positive last week. If you're below 45, it's not a problem. Get on an aircraft and go to Ibiza because everything's happy. I'm kind of a little bit slightly below that, but with optimism. And I think you're all been in the industry as long as I have, and we've seen it all before. Let's get through it. We get through it working together. And so it was great to have time. Thank you to Rebecca and Lisa and Alfredo for hosting. It's 8 o'clock in my country, so it's time for a nice glass of wine. So stay safe, everybody, and hopefully, good luck for the US.